Well, I think the reasons are twofold. One, there's a principled reason that gay lesbian politics has historically been a politics of alliance and of coalition, and that as a matter of principle, the pursuit of the right to marry ought not leave behind those in the movement who, for whatever reason, cannot or do not want to be married, or on the other hand, those of our heterosexual brothers and sisters who have a variety of family forms, none of which can be captured or cabined in the marital form, but whose intimate relationships and families have an integrity that is worthy of societal recognition and indeed legal protection. So that's the second point. It has to do with seeing the fact that there is indeed a connection between the demand for same-sex marriage and all these other forms of family and the issues that they entail. Issues that have to do not just with sexuality in a strict sense, but with family, children, reproduction, gender identity and gender norms, gender equality, dependency, property, the organization and distribution of work inside and outside the home, economic questions involving the state conferral of economic benefits and options, and the like. We need to link those two things together because they are actually linked in the lives of most people. At the same time, I would want to argue that there are many people who want to get married, many people who are married, who do not have children, and will never be in a situation where they have to take care of children. Notwithstanding the observation made earlier that marriage is about families, I would remind you that that is only true in some instances for some people. And one of the real concerns I have about the turn in the debate right now is the collapsing, even as we recognize that these issues of marriage and family are connected, the collapsing of considerations that have to do with family into the question of marriage. In this debate that I mentioned to you, which I attended on Monday, there was a pretty clear recognition that the folks who oppose same-sex marriage weren't going to get too much mileage denying the right of gay men and lesbians to intimate sexual association. And so this question of sexual dignity was one which even they were willing to take off the table. What they weren't willing to do was to move from an acceptance of the proposition that gay men and lesbians have the right to equal sexual dignity to a recognition that gay men and lesbians also have the right to equal access to the institution of marriage. And the reason? Because marriage, they said, is not just about, or even primarily about, the intimate association between the two consenting adults who are party to marriage. Marriage, they said, is about procreation. And at that point, they fell into a whole host of mostly biological arguments about why gay men and lesbians, because they can't procreate or can't procreate like other people, ought not be allowed to make successful marriage equality arguments, right? Relying on the basic principle that only likes need to be treated alike. Different people who are differently situated can't make the same claims. And one of the dangers, it seems to me, of not recognizing that marriage and family, the right to marriage and the right to family, though connected in important ways as I've tried to suggest, are at other levels quite distinct is that this argument about procreation will continue to be available as a basis for arguing that the denial of the right to marry to gay men and lesbians is not a form of unconstitutional discrimination, or more simply, a form of injustice. The third and final point I want to make has to do with why this debate has to be or should be cast in terms that have to do with civism and politics and civil rights. So I want to say that I think to put the question in the terms that the organizers of this panel have put it seems to me to be exactly right. So much of the discussion about the question of same-sex marriage has focused on what folks understand to be the immorality or the morality of the denial or conferral of marriage rights on gay men and lesbians. But to say that marriage is a civil right and is not an issue that has to do with the morality of the sexuality of the people seeking to be married is to move the debate in important ways into the arena of citizenship. To say that marriage is a civil right is to say that there is something important in a democracy for the state to extend benefits such as those it extends in the case of marriage to all citizens, as citizens, regardless of what other citizens may think about the morality of the relationship which is seeking state recognition. It will also, I think, go some way toward flushing out a fact which has characterized, in my view, the opposition to same-sex marriage from its inception. And that is this: regardless of the terms, procreation, the unnaturalness of the sexual relations between gay men and lesbians, regardless of the terms in which that opposition is cast, ultimately, it all seems to boil down to views of a moral or even religious cast. And I feel very strongly that in a country committed to the principle of the separation of church and state, and I say this as someone who would have been, had he not been on the train coming down here from New York this morning, in church. In a country that is committed to the separation of church and state, it is simply unacceptable for me to insist on the adoption as public policy of views which I can only trace to private religious revelation. Unless I can offer a public reason which is shared by persons who do not share my religious views for or against a particular policy, then it seems to me that my views are fairly not entitled to the same kind of deference or attention that they would be if I were making an argument that was rooted in a reason that we could all accept and wouldn't require me to say at the end of the day, because God told me so. I think the opponents of same-sex marriage, many of them, are in that situation. Indeed, at the debate I attended on Monday, one of the speakers went so far as to say that anyone who challenged her view that same-sex marriage ought not be extended, it was a right that ought not be extended, was victimizing religious people, and that such a position was willing to use the law to repress, marginalize, or stigmatize the views of religious people. I don't think that's true at all. I think, in fact, we're living at a time when we've gone through great social change and continue to go through great social change, and there are deep anxieties in some part of the population about that change. But I do not believe that that anxiety ought to be used or ought to be viewed, particularly when it's dressed up in religious language, as an obstacle to open, robust, and rigorous public debate. And I'm grateful to the organizers of this panel that they have offered today a venue for precisely such debate. Thank you very much.